if I can find my notes on this here iPad. There it is. So I think I told you guys last time that I enjoy reading longform.org articles. And there's this really cool feature where you can kind of find a random article. So I clicked that a couple of times and came across this article, which was originally written for GQ magazine, and it is called The Legend of Elden Kid, America's most dedicated, most creative people smuggler. A decade in the life of our country's wiliest coyote. And it's written by Kathy Dobie. So I'll go through my notes, but there's also some quotes taken directly from the article. Also, disclaimer, I'm standing and I'm holding my iPad, so I hope that's not too much of a distraction. I might have to switch hands every now and again. So let's get right into it. So, Elden Kid started smuggling people across the border in 1989. He was a clean-cut Mormon from California, which really surprised me. And he barely spoke Spanish when he started and worked for people who really only spoke Spanish. He was known as the American Coyote. Mostly he smuggled Mexicans, but ended up also smuggling Chinese into America. And the word kind of got out about him because a lot of the Mexicans that he smuggled into America started working in Chinese restaurants. So word spread that way. He transferred people across the border dozens upon dozens of times, and he said he was always impressed by the bravery that he saw in the various people that he was able to smuggle across the border, from grandmas to children. So, one border crossing that was described in the beginning of the article took place on a Tijuana beach, and it was two Chinese young women. He always preferred a foggy or rainy night, and he liked to leave around 10 or 11 p.m. He got the girls ready with wetsuits, always dark wetsuits. He would also attach a duck decoy, like buoy, on top of their heads as well, just in case they were spotted from afar. It would just look like two ducks. He gave them boogie boards and draped a tow rope around his neck, and he fastened fins to his feet, got on his back, and just started kicking. He would use the Tijuana Beach lighthouse light as a reference, started swimming west, and then eventually north toward America. He was usually in the water for She described him as still impressive in stature, and it wasn't hard to believe that he was a legend of his time, which was now long gone. The border has changed a lot since 1989. Before 9/11, the border was kind of more of a chaotic place, and Elden in those times felt completely invincible, bulletproof. He got married at 22 and almost immediately started having children, and he was very single-minded on the fact that he needed to provide for his family in the best way that he could, whether it was risky or illegal. This is a quotation from the article. The legalities of immigration didn't much concern him. This was about making money. If Elden had a flag, it would be for his family. He was an adventurer, a restless, ready soul. Human smuggling married so many parts of his personality. His athleticism, his willingness, the rebellious prankster, and the defender of the underdog. As his now ex-wife says, with both appreciation and pain, he is the freest man that I know. So back when he first started in 1989, like I said, the border was a lot more chaotic. Hundreds of people would swarm the Border Patrol agents, and there were not enough Border Patrol agents. So all people really had to do was slip under the fence. And then Elden would just hang out by the Tijuana River with a rubber raft, and he would charge immigrants $25 a person to bring them across the river. Elden sometimes was joined by his friend Tim Baraston, who was a surfer and a carpenter that he'd met while leading whitewater rafting groups in the US and Mexico along the Guatemalan border. When the river was running full, the two were at the height of their business. The going price for taking someone all the way from Tijuana to Los Angeles was only $250. $1,000 night to them felt like a huge success. In 1994, things changed when Clinton intensified security on the most heavily trafficked section of the border, which was the sixth westernmost miles. Lines of double fencing were built and stadium lighting was installed. Crossing the border became a lot more difficult then, but being a smuggler was a lot more lucrative. Elden started charging $1,800 a head for Mexicans and $5,000 for Chinese immigrants who were riskier to take across the border because they were undocumented on both sides of the border. He tried to make sure the fat children always traveled for free. The routes demanded more inventive and complex schemes. One example was on Christmas Eve. He crossed 6 young men over the border into California, dressed them in Santa Claus suits, and gave them bicycles, and then sent them north through an area often patrolled by border police. And during hunting season or pheasant hunting season, he would dress them in hunting vests and give them BB guns. And of course, he was kind of playing into their ego a little bit, or like, you know, a border patrol officer loves the idea that a bunch of young Boy Scouts want to or aspire to be like them. So Elden used that information to listen in and could tell if he was spotted or being watched, and then he would try again later. Also, he was very quick on his feet and intelligent. So once when he was discovered by Mexican police, he let the cops chase him into the bottom of a gulch, where he immediately clutched his chest and then fell to the ground, kind of pretending to be unconscious, and 4 cops had to drag him out of the 180-foot deep canyon. He was 270 pounds, so 270 pounds of dead weight is a lot of dead weight. And so when he got to the top of the canyon, the officers were so exhausted, and all he had to do was pop up and sprint away. But as you would expect, he was eventually arrested for smuggling in Toluca, about 40 miles west of Mexico City, but not for smuggling humans, for smuggling marijuana. He was hired by a wealthy Mexican-American mango grower to drive the motorhome down into south central Mexico for a large family gathering, and then drive it back. And he had done this for the man multiple times, but he claimed that he didn't know that there was marijuana in the home. But it didn't matter. He was transported to a prison in central Mexico called Almoya de Juarez, and the cell block contained 250 men, and he was the only American. He was tormented by other prisoners, and he was extremely depressed. He would spend his days just out the corner of the cell, of the yard outside, just staring at the sky. But he did try to stay in shape, and eventually he acted as protection for a lot of the weaker prisoners there, the underdogs. In February 1996, under a treaty that allowed American prisoners in Mexican jails to serve their time in the United States, he was transferred to Texas, and 8 months later he was released. So he kind of promised his wife and kids that he wouldn't smuggle anymore, but then 5 months later he started running people across the border into Arizona again. And at this time he knew a lot more Spanish because of his time in prison. To this day, he's not really sure why he took the risk to do it again. I'm assuming it's like an adrenaline rush and it's good money. And I think he felt like he was actually helping people, which he was, but not for free. Within months of getting out of prison, he established a route out of Mexicali using an old trick, which was under the guise of being a bird watcher. On a desolate stretch, he would set up camp on federally owned land on the American side of the border. He set up a tent in his trailer, and he would just walk around with binoculars pretending to, or actually looking at birds. And whenever border patrol came by, he would later you would hear them on the radio saying, "Oh, he's just some bird watching nature boy." So by 2001, Elden's operation was booming again, and him and his friend Tim were now taking people over the Rio Grande into Texas. And the two men were thick as thieves. They were joined at the hip. The route was easier with a partner, and Elden was still on parole, so he wanted to play it safe. Tim said that it just came natural to them because of their river rafting tours. They knew about transporting people and the logistics of packing. And he said they were so good that they got careless. So in February 2001, Tim had flown in for a job from his home in Santa Cruz. He rented a 15-seat passenger van, drove down to Big Bend National Park on the banks of the Rio Grande, where Elden had already set up camp. Elden was driving an old Dodge van with bumper stickers written in Spanish and no rear license plate. This was their decoy car. In the late afternoon, the two men waded across the river and walked for about an hour and a half to Boquias. I might have said that wrong. It's Bocquillas, where they met a group of indigenous people from Oaxaca. They ferried everyone across the river, and they hiked for a half hour more, and then they arrived at the camp. The next morning, they drove out of the camp, and Tim and all of the Oaxacans were in one vehicle, and Elden was up ahead in his vehicle being a scout. They were headed to Fort Stockton to hide for the night, as they always did, and there they would get all of the men haircuts and shave their mustaches and put everyone into thrift store outfits. And sometimes Tim and Elden handed them Bibles for the ride and as cover. 10 miles south of Fort Stockton, where the 2-lane road runs through the desert with nowhere to hide, Elden spotted Border Patrol, and he instantly pulled over to the side of the road and said, "Oh, good morning, officer. I'm wondering if you can help me. My son wants to join the Border Patrol." So the agent gave Elden a phone number, but as another Border Patrol van was driving by, Elden kind of gave it the side eye, and the Border Patrol officer noticed, so he took note of Elden and his van and they ran his name, and they found that he had a prior for transporting marijuana. Later that day, they put out an alert to look out for Tim and Elden. A month later, an off-duty Border Patrol agent in Fort Stockton spotted Elden walking into a Walmart. They had just made another border run, picking up 18 Mexicans, including a 6- and a 7-year-old. They checked them into 2 different motels, and they were out buying them socks and shoes. It was 9 p.m., and for the next 12 hours, several law enforcement officers watched as the two men drove between the La Quinta Inn and Atrium motels, bringing bags of food from McDonald's and trays of coffee into the rooms. In the morning, they saw Elden and Tim load 2 vans full of people. The cops waited until the men had driven out of the city and were heading west on Route 10. Finally, they swarmed Elden's van and brought Elden and Tim in for an interview. Elden knew that they were in trouble, and they ended up being locked up in Pecos, Texas, where Elden wrote the following to his wife. Neither of us fully calculated the risk. It seems like, in some ways, a good thing to be caught, because when would I have stopped? After 28 days, Tim got friends to sign bonds totaling $60,000 for his bail. And he ended up driving to Santa Cruz. Because of his criminal record, Elden was left inside, and he was looking at 5 years in jail. After more than a decade of successful smuggling, Elden figured that he had some valuable information to trade, and he was looking for a deal. Before long, 5 agents with U.S. Border Patrol arrived. After grilling Elden about his underground contacts in the Mexican and Chinese communities, they realized that he could be useful, and he's ended up signing a contract of cooperation. He was allowed to go home before sentencing. In exchange for his help, the judge gave Elden 3 years of probation, and he would eventually report to agents of the new Department of Homeland Security. Elden would be an information gatherer. They wanted him to watch different people, so maybe watching someone at a warehouse, or getting close to an important getting close to someone who knows a lot of information. He says that he gave the authorities puzzle pieces, rarely getting a glimpse of the bigger picture, but he preferred it that way. Eventually, his smuggling contracts dried up, but he still kept his eyes open.